What are you doing
Rain
out here
smeared
this
across
late?
the windshield
License and
in crooked
registration.
silver lines,
Here they are,
the
officer.
wipers beating like a pulse.
Is there a problem?
Darnell's hand stayed at 10 and 2.
License and
He felt
registration,
the
sir. Do
strobing
you know
blue
why I pulled
lights
you over
carve through
tonight?
the night behind him. The siren didn't need
I
to
was going
scream
the speed
anymore.
limit, officer.
He was
Here are my
already pulled
documents.
over. The officer approached slowly, boots thudding on soaked asphalt. The flashlight beam hit his face like an accusation. A hand hovered too long over the holster. License and registration. The voice was flat. Practiced, already judging. Darnell moved deliberately. Fingers spread wide, the way every black man learns young. The rain hissed against the cruiser's hood. A second flashlight joined the first. "This your car?" His name was on the registration. The badge in his jacket pocket was heavier than usual. He hadn't flashed it yet. Part of him wanted to wait. Step out of the vehicle. The command was sharper this time. The officer's jaw was tight. Backup headlights flared behind. Another unit. Darnell stepped out, breath fogging the air. The officer's hand shifted. The other officer muttered something into the radio. Their eyes didn't register him as human, just a threat. Hands where I can see them, now. Darnell raised his hands. Rain pulled down his sleeves. His badge pressed against his ribs like a loaded truth. Then the officer's voice cracked through the storm. "You people never learn." The world narrowed to that line. The street lamps hummed. The cold bit into his wrists as the cuffs clicked shut. The badge in his pocket stayed hidden. For now. Rain fell in steady sheets, flattening the highway into a gleaming ribbon. Darnell King kept both hands on the wheel, his heartbeat syncing with the wiper's metronomic sweep. The cruiser behind him clung to his rear bumper like a threat made visible. "Pull over," the loudspeaker barked. He signaled, eased onto the shoulder. The strobing lights turned raindrops into shards of blue and red glass. Boots hit wet asphalt. A flashlight slammed into his eyes. "License and registration." His voice didn't crack. "It's in the glove compartment." Slow. His fingers moved like a surgeon's. Deliberate. Visible. He handed over the documents. The officer didn't even look at the name. "This your vehicle?" "Yes." The flashlight swept the interior like he was already guilty. "Step out." Darnell opened the door. Water slapped his shoes. The officer stood too close, hand grazing the holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them." They both knew what this was. Race first. Everything else second. Another set of headlights flared behind. "Back up, you nervous?" the officer said, mouth curling. "No. Looks like you are." Darnell's pulse spiked, but his face stayed granite. "Turn around." He didn't resist, not because he feared the cuffs, but because he understood exactly how fast this could turn fatal. Cold steel bit into his wrist. "Got a nice car?" the officer muttered, patting him down. "Not bad for someone like you." Darnell's jaw locked. Ward leaned in close. "You people never learn." The line landed like a gunshot. Rain surged louder. The second officer opened the cruiser's back door. Darnell sat down without a word, cuffs pressing into skin. Through the wet glass, his badge sat in his jacket pocket. Heavy. Waiting. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, sterile and cold. The air inside the precinct carried the faint tang of old coffee and bleach. Darnell's shoes left a trail of water on the linoleum. His cuffs were still on. Ward guided him through intake like a hunter parading a trophy. "Suspect in custody," Ward announced, voice inflated with performative authority. The desk sergeant looked up, unimpressed, chewing on the end of a pen. "Charge: failure to comply. Suspicious behavior." Darnell's eyes stayed on a crack in the tile floor. The words slid through the air with the smoothness of routine. There was no curiosity, no check. "Just paperwork." The sergeant nodded once. "Print him." Gloved hands grabbed his wrists. Cold ink rolled across his fingertips. Flashbulbs popped. He watched the camera lens as if staring down an old lie. The officer behind the desk didn't meet his eyes once. A young rookie whispered too loudly near the lockers. "He looks clean. Doesn't even have—" "Shut it," someone else muttered. Laughter followed. Ward leaned against the counter, smug, tapping the pen on the clipboard. "Somebody like this always acts calm." "Till they don't." Darnell said nothing. Control was armor. A female officer entered with a paper cup of coffee. She glanced at him briefly, recognition flickering but buried fast beneath practiced indifference. She scanned his ID again, didn't speak, handed it back like handing off an inconvenience. The sergeant tossed a form across the counter. "Sign here." He couldn't. His wrists were still cuffed. Ward smirked. Oh, right, the cuff stayed on anyway. Someone else signed for him. Voices hummed around him like machinery. The rhythm of institutional racism wasn't loud. It was quiet, efficient, casual. Everyone knew their part. A fingerprint scanner beeped. Someone entered false shorthand into a log. Ward's tone grew louder. Pulled him over near 17 tinted windows. Wouldn't comply. You know the type. No one asked for evidence, a rookie nodded. Yeah, the type. Darnell felt the shift in the room. Micro-expressions, shared glances, reflexive solidarity. Not one of them thought to verify. They moved him down the hallway, past the holding cells that smelled like mildew and ammonia. Inside the processing room, an older intake officer scribbled his name onto a blank sheet before even reading the Hatin Males Black Mid-46 Inu, the details stacked into the system without truth. Attached, Darnell stared at the one-way mirror across the room. He could almost hear the static of the security camera above, steady, watching. Ward leaned close to him, voice low enough to escape the recorders. This is where people like you stay quiet. Good choice so far. Darnell didn't blink. The paperwork shuffled forward. His belt and personal items were cataloged. The badge in his jacket pocket stayed out of sight, tucked into a tray marked Personal Effects. Cell 3, the sergeant said. 2 officers escorted him to the holding area. The door buzzed open, metal on metal, the sound sharp and final. He sat on the hard bench, rainwater still soaking into his collar. The echo of their laughter carried faintly from down the hall. They didn't know yet. The system had already decided what he was before he spoke a single word. He leaned back against the wall, steady. He could feel the badge waiting in the evidence tray. The storm hadn't even started. The precinct's main hallway hummed with fluorescent monotony. Ward leaned on the counter, laughing with 2 other officers, replaying his version of the traffic stop like a highlight reel. Words like non-compliant and aggressive stance punctuated the air. None of it carried a trace of truth. Inside cell 3, Darnell sat straight on the bench. He heard the rhythm of the building, the soft clicks of terminals, the buzz of comms, the predictable machinery of bureaucracy doing exactly what it was designed to do. A distant phone rang. A door opened. Boots with authority entered. Lieutenant on deck, someone muttered. The intake room fell half silent. Lieutenant Price strode in, coat half buttoned, irritation carved deep into his expression. He'd been woken up. He snatched the paperwork from the sergeant's hand without looking at anyone. What's this? Traffic stop. Suspicious driver. Non-compliance. Ward's voice was easy, practiced. Price scanned the top of the form, then flipped the page. His brow creased. He checked the ID again. His hand froze. Where is he? In the cell, the sergeant said. Price's voice shifted, low and clipped. Bring him out now. Ward's grin faltered. Sir, he's... Now. 2 officers opened the cell door. Darnell walked out without a word, posture unbent. The fluorescent lights cast hard lines across his face. Price stared at him for a long second. Sheriff King. The words cut through the room. Every sound snapped quiet. Ward's face drained color in real time. Someone coughed nervously. Darnell didn't move, didn't offer the badge. Price already knew. Price turned toward Ward, voice iron. You brought in the sheriff of this county. Ward opened his mouth. Sir, he didn't. Shut your mouth. The silence deepened. Even the printers seemed to hesitate. Price held up the paperwork like it was evidence of stupidity. You didn't run the ID? Ward stammered. He wasn't cooperating. Price slammed the folder down. You arrested your own sheriff on fabricated grounds. Darnell stepped forward just slightly, calm, measured. His voice was cold steel. And you cuffed me for driving home. No shouting. No dramatics. Just precision. Ward's breath stuttered. Price turned to the sergeant. Get those cuffs off, now. The key scraped against metal. The click rang out like a verdict. Ward took a half step back. His earlier arrogance bled out through every pore. He tried to recover, fumbling for procedural language. He wasn't identified. He didn't say... Darnell's eyes cut through him. I don't have to announce who I am to not be treated like a criminal. A rookie officer near the lockers muttered something about protocol. Price glared. The muttering died. Sheriff, Price said, tone shifting into the bureaucratic caution of someone who understood the storm about to land. This is unfortunate. Darnell stared at him. No, this is normal. That's the problem. The sentence hit harder than a shout. No one in the room moved. Price signaled the sergeant. Clear the intake. Everyone out. Officers scattered with forced nonchalance. But their eyes lingered on Ward. Ward stood rigid, the swagger gone, replaced with thin, brittle panic. Price leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. This isn't going away. IA will have to be notified. Legal's already in the loop. I know, Darnell said. You could have said something at the stop. Darnell's reply was immediate. I shouldn't have to. The space between them tightened. Ward took a step forward, desperation clawing through his controlled tone. This was a misunderstanding. Darnell cut him off without raising his voice. You said you people never learn. The line hit the room again, colder this time. Price's jaw clenched. Ward's breath faltered. No denial came. There wasn't one available. Price exhaled through his teeth. I'll inform IA. Legal will move fast. Press might get this before the end of the night. Darnell straightened his collar, wrists raw where the cuffs had bitten. Then let them. Price didn't argue. Ward stood alone in the intake room, surrounded by the silence of men who had laughed an hour ago. The power had shifted. The machine had not. Morning cracked gray over the precinct. News hadn't broken yet, but tension hung in the building like smoke. Every hallway hummed with quiet, deliberate avoidance. No one spoke Darnell's name out loud. In the captain's office, the blinds were half closed. Captain Rourke sat stiff behind his desk, union reps on one side, legal counsel on the other. Ward sat in the corner, pale, jaw tight, pretending control he didn't have. Darnell stood uninvited, unshaken. Rourke started with the practiced tone of crisis management. We all agree last night was unfortunate. Darnell didn't respond. The union rep leaned forward, a man with thinning hair and the permanent smirk of someone who has spent years protecting bad cops. Sheriff King, Officer Ward made a procedural error. We can contain this, a procedural error. Darnell's voice cut through the room. He racially profiled me, cuffed me, booked me, and wrote up a false charge. The legal counsel cleared her throat. We can phrase this as a misidentification. He didn't know who. Exactly. Darnell's jaw locked. He didn't know who I was. That's why he thought he could. Ward shifted in the chair. I followed protocol. He was non-compliant. Protocol doesn't include slurs, Darnell said. The room stilled. The union rep spread his hands. These are serious accusations. Without video, there's video, Darnell interrupted. Body cam. The rep's smile faltered for the first time. Rourke leaned forward, voice lower. We need to handle this internally before it gets out of hand. There's a chain of command. Statements to align. Press lines to draft. Darnell's stare didn't move. You want a narrative, not accountability. The silence confirmed everything. Ward finally spoke, voice strained. You're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't even know who you were. This isn't personal. Darnell stepped closer. That's exactly why it's personal. You didn't need to know me to decide what I was. Rourke rubbed his temples. Sheriff, think about the department. A scandal like this is exactly what the department deserves, Darnell said. The legal counsel began to shuffle papers. We're prepared to suspend Ward with pay while IA reviews the footage. We'll emphasize training gaps, stress response. You'll emphasize nothing, Darnell cut in. I'll be filing an official complaint, and I'll be releasing my statement. Ward's head snapped up. To the press? Darnell didn't answer. He didn't need to. The union rep's tone hardened. This department doesn't need to be divided right now. It already is, Darnell said. You just prefer it silent. The meeting stalled. No one could spin what happened into something clean, not with a badge in his pocket and a body cam waiting to surface. Rourke finally leaned back, voice brittle. Sheriff King, if this goes public, the blowback will be heavy. On everyone, including you. I can carry that, Darnell replied.
Can you?
Rourke's stare broke first. Outside the office, the hallway filled with quiet glances. Officers pretended to work while listening. Ward exited last, his shoulders rigid, face set in the fragile defiance of a man still clinging to institutional protection. Two officers muttered as he passed. Union had already started whispering. Darnell walked through the station like he owned the ground he'd been humiliated on hours earlier. Not because the power was his, but because the truth was. In the captain's office, the damage control plan collapsed in real time. The machine was already shifting to protect itself. Darnell was already steps ahead. By dawn, the footage was out. Someone inside the department leaked the body cam clip. It hit the news cycle like a detonation. The 30-second segment played on repeat across every local station. Ward's voice was clear, the line carved in concrete. You people never learn. The lights, the rain, the cuffs on the sheriff, the badge hidden in his pocket. Darnell watched from his office. The volume was low, but the weight of each word pressed down like concrete. Reporters flooded the station gates before noon. A wall of cameras formed outside the entrance, microphones stretched like bayonets. Commentators on morning shows dissected, every frame with the precision of a blade. Officer, Ward has not yet released a statement. One anchor said. The sheriff remained calm throughout the encounter, another replied. Ward's name trended before lunch. So did Darnell's. Inside the squad room, conversations fractured. Some officers whispered support low and tight. Others avoided eye contact entirely. A few muttered about media circus and overblown outrage. The union representative moved through the building like a quiet storm, gathering allies, preparing counter-narratives. In the locker room, Ward sat on a bench staring at the floor. His phone buzzed nonstop. Anonymous defenders filled comment sections with familiar lines. He didn't know. He followed procedure. This is reverse racism. But the clip didn't need interpretation. It was too clean, too sharp. Rourke stormed into the press room at midday, red-faced, suit crumpled. We are not taking questions, he snapped at the wall of reporters. This is under internal review. The crowd shouted over him. Words like racism, abuse, power. Sheriff ricocheted through the air. Darnell stayed upstairs. He didn't give interviews. He didn't release statements. He didn't need to. The video was speaking. By mid-afternoon, protesters gathered outside the station, signs in the rain, chants hammering against the brick walls. Ward watched from a second-floor window, pale and unmoving. The union went on offense fast. A spokesperson released a brief statement calling the incident a regrettable misunderstanding under stressful conditions. They highlighted Ward's years of service, cited protocol confusion, and painted him as a man unfairly targeted by political forces. The language was calculated, clean, but the public didn't buy it. City officials started calling. The mayor's office issued a statement promising full transparency. IA accelerated their timeline. Lawyers started circling like vultures. Inside the station, Ward became a ghost, untouchable to some, radioactive to others. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. He wasn't isolated out of guilt. He was isolated because everyone understood exactly what he'd done and what it meant for them. At 5 p.m., Darnell stepped into the corridor. Officers moved aside without speaking. He walked through the lobby, out into the rain. Reporters surged forward like a wave. Sheriff King, do you have a statement? He didn't stop. Are you pressing charges? He kept walking. Do you believe this was racially motivated? He paused at the steps, rain pooling on his coat. You saw the video, he said, voice steady, unshaken. You don't need me to explain what you already know. The crowd erupted. The quote looped on every network an hour later. Ward watched it from the break room. No union statement could erase what everyone had already seen. The institution had been caught in daylight. The story had already left their control. The IA interview room was deliberately plain. Gray walls, 2 cameras, a single rectangular table bolted to the floor. Everything about the space was designed to neutralize emotion. It didn't work. Ward sat on one side, shoulders tight, jaw set. Darnell sat opposite, posture straight, expression unreadable. 2 IA investigators flanked the ends of the table. One typed. One watched. Recording initiated at 0900, the lead investigator said. Internal Affairs interview. Subject, Officer Matthew Ward. Present, Sheriff Darnell King. IA investigators Gomez and Flint. Gomez's voice carried no warmth. Officer Ward, for the record, this interview concerns the incident of October 14th at 22:34 hours involving Sheriff King. Do you understand? Ward nodded once. Verbal response required. Yes. Gomez leaned forward. We're going to review the footage and your statements. You'll have the opportunity to clarify any inconsistencies. Ward's eyes flicked to the camera in the corner, then to the union attorney beside him. The attorney didn't speak. The footage played. The rain, the lights, the words. You people never learn. Ward's breathing hitched barely enough to see. Flint clicked her pen. Your report says the driver refused to comply. The footage shows immediate compliance. Your report says you felt threatened. The footage shows hands visible at all times. Explain the discrepancy. Ward's voice was dry. It was dark. I misread his movements. Gomez didn't look away. You said the line on tape. That wasn't about movement. Ward's mouth tightened. It was a stressful situation. That line isn't protocol, Flint said. Silence stretched like wire. The union attorney finally spoke. My client acknowledges the language was inappropriate but maintains the stop itself was lawful. Darnell's voice entered the room for the first time. Controlled. Precise. Lawful? You profiled me. You cuffed me. You entered false statements. And you said exactly what you believed when you thought I had no power. Ward's eyes flicked away. Gomez didn't intervene. She let the silence do the work. Ward tried again. I thought the vehicle was stolen. Flint tapped the printed report. No bolo, no description match. No probable cause listed. That's not a mistake. That's intent. The temperature in the room dropped. The attorney shifted in his chair. We believe departmental bias is being exaggerated here for political. Darnell cut him off. I didn't leak the footage, but the public saw it. They saw how your client looks at people like me. Gomez folded her hands. Officer Ward, IA, has reviewed body cam footage, dash cam footage, dispatch logs, and intake records. Every step of your report is contradicted by the record. Do you have anything else to add? Ward's jaw worked silently. Flint pushed the folder forward. Policy violations, unlawful stop, false reporting, abuse of authority, racial discrimination, procedural misconduct. Each one is independently grounds for termination. The union attorney stiffened. We'll appeal any disciplinary action. This is political. Gomez's tone didn't shift. Then appeal. It doesn't change the facts. Ward finally spoke, a crack beneath his controlled tone. This is being blown out of proportion because of who he is. Darnell's reply was quiet. No. It's being seen for what it is because of who you are. The clock ticked loud in the stillness. Flint closed the file. This will move to a formal hearing. Officer Ward, you're suspended pending the outcome. Surrender your badge and service weapon. The words landed like a hammer. Ward's hand hovered over his badge longer than necessary. It wasn't respect. It was disbelief. He placed it on the table slowly, as if the metal itself had betrayed him. Darnell didn't move. Didn't celebrate. He simply watched the system bend slightly under its own weight. Ward walked out flanked by union counsel. No salutes. No sympathetic looks, just silence. Gomez turned to Darnell. We'll proceed fast. This won't stay contained. It's not supposed to, Darnell said. For the first time since the stop, the room felt like it had shifted off its usual axis. Not justice, not yet, but something had cracked. By the next morning, the station atmosphere changed again. The leak had cracked the surface, but the union moved like a machine. Flyers appeared in the break room overnight. Support Officer Ward, due process for all. Emails circulated quietly, urging solidarity. A meeting was called in the main briefing room. Union leadership filled the front row, shoulders squared, voices already rehearsed. Darnell entered without speaking. Conversations dropped to half volume. Union President Keller took the floor first. Broad-shouldered, calculated tone. What happened last week is being weaponized against one of our own. Officer Ward is being targeted by political pressure, not evidence. We need to stand together. Several officers nodded, some out of loyalty, some out of fear. Keller continued. This department has to show unity. If they can do this to him, they can do it to any of us. Darnell stood near the back, hands behind his back, listening. He didn't need to speak to feel the temperature of the room. Divided. Lines already drawn. Keller's voice hardened. We all saw the tape. But context matters. He didn't know who was behind the wheel. It was dark. High-stress situation. We don't crucify an officer for doing his job. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "They're hanging him to make an example." Darnell stepped forward, calm but surgical. He wasn't doing his job. He fabricated a threat that didn't exist, and he said exactly what he believed when he thought no one would ever hold him accountable. Keller's eyes narrowed. You're not just the sheriff. You're the complainant. You're not impartial here. I don't need to be impartial to speak the truth, Darnell replied. The room stiffened. One officer in the second row spoke up, voice sharp. What if he made a mistake? You're acting like he's the devil. Darnell's tone didn't rise. Mistake is paperwork filed wrong. Mistake is forgetting a radio call. This was a choice. Another officer muttered under his breath, not quietly enough. He's only pushing this because he's black. Silence fell like a blade. Darnell turned his head slowly toward the sound. No raised voice. Just precision. That's exactly why this department is rotting from the inside out. You say the quiet part out loud, then expect the world to pretend it's nuance. The tension in the room sharpened. Keller slammed a hand on the table. Enough. This is a union meeting, not a public forum. We protect our own. You protect some of your own, Darnell said. The rest of us live with the cost. The union rep beside Keller whispered something to him, then spoke louder. We'll be issuing a formal statement calling this an overreach. You may be sheriff, but this department doesn't belong to you. Darnell's reply was immediate. It doesn't belong to you either. It belongs to the public you swore to protect, and you've forgotten that. The murmurs splintered into two clear camps. Some officers looked down at their boots. Others stared him down with open hostility. A handful met his eyes, not with warmth but with recognition of truth. When the meeting broke, Keller shook hands in the front row like a politician at a rally. Ward's defenders clustered near the door. One brushed past Darnell deliberately, shoulder first. Outside the room, a folded note was taped to his locker. Plain paper, block letters. Back down. He crumpled it without pausing. The wall had formed exactly as expected. Darnell wasn't surprised. He'd seen the machine build itself many times before. This time it had chosen its target openly. And he wasn't moving. The hearing chamber was full before the first gavel fell. Rows of press cameras lined the back wall. Protesters filled the steps outside, their chants leaking through the heavy doors in rhythmic waves. The city council had turned this into a spectacle because it had no choice. The video was still burning through the news cycle. Darnell sat at the witness table, suit pressed, posture steady. Ward sat 10 feet away with union lawyers flanking him, pale but still wearing the thin veneer of defiance. Behind them, officers filled the gallery. Lines were visible without being spoken. Council Chair Medina opened the session. This public hearing concerns the traffic stop and subsequent arrest of Sheriff Darnell King by Officer Matthew Ward. Her voice was measured, but the weight of the room pressed through every syllable. Union counsel stood first, speaking in a practiced rhythm. This incident has been taken out of context. Officer Ward acted on perceived threat under conditions of uncertainty. He did not know the driver's identity, and he followed protocol as trained. What happened after is being used to smear a good officer's name, the room murmured. Council member Ruiz leaned forward. We all saw the footage. Union counsel didn't flinch. Footage doesn't capture perception in the moment. Fear is real. Officers make split-second decisions. Ruiz cut her off. Racism isn't a split-second decision. Ward's jaw clenched. Darnell waited until they called his name. He walked to the witness chair without a word. The cameras locked onto him. Sheriff King, Medina began. You've chosen to testify publicly. Proceed. His voice was level, stripped of ornament. I was driving home. I complied fully. I was cuffed, humiliated, and processed like a criminal because an officer saw me as a threat before I said a word. He didn't know I wore a badge. He didn't need to. That's how this works. The room fell still. Union counsel rose immediately. Sheriff, with respect, this seems more like an emotional interpretation than... Darnell cut in sharp. He said, you people never learn. That's not emotion. That's record. A low rumble went through the chamber. Cameras caught every word. Councilmember Hayes leaned toward Ward. Officer Ward, did you make that statement? Ward's lawyer jumped in. My client acknowledges poor phrasing under stress. Hayes's tone hardened. Did he say it? Ward's silence was answer enough. Ruiz pushed the line further. Sheriff King isn't here because of a misunderstanding. He's here because what happened to him happens to people who don't have his badge and no one believes them. Ward's shoulders stiffened. Keller, seated behind him, glared like the entire machine depended on this one man not collapsing under pressure. Darnell's hands remained still on the table. You want to make this about perception? It's about power. You saw how fast the system tried to bury this until the footage leaked. That's not an accident. That's design. The chamber broke into applause from the gallery. Medina slammed the gavel once. Order. Ward finally spoke, voice strained. I was doing my job. I didn't know who he was. Darnell's reply was flat. And that's exactly why you felt safe doing it. Keller whispered something to Ward, but it didn't matter. The air had shifted. The Union narrative was crumbling in real time. Council Chair Medina turned to the IA investigator present. Recommendation? Gomez spoke clearly. Termination and referral for prosecution. A single sentence cut the entire chamber into silence. Ward's lawyer protested immediately, citing procedure, appeals, union protections, precedent. The words bounced off the walls without force. Outside, the chants grew louder, synchronized and hard. Darnell left the stand as the hearing continued. Ward sat frozen. The machine was still fighting, but it was bleeding. By dawn the next day, the Union machine was no longer controlling the narrative. The headline looped on every local and national station. Officer facing termination after racist traffic stop of county sheriff. The footage replayed on a loop. His voice, "You people never learn," had become the story's spine. No press release could undo it. Ward walked out of the station in plain clothes. No badge, no gun. 2 IA officers stood at the door when he turned in his credentials. He didn't make eye contact. Reporters yelled his name from behind the barricades. Flashbulbs hammered the gray morning air. Keller tried to contain the fire. Press conference. Tight statements. Due process. Political theater context, but no one cared. The city smelled blood. Darnell watched from his office, not with satisfaction. There was no satisfaction in this. Only the hard, sterile confirmation of everything he already knew. The phone rang nonstop. Journalists, civil rights groups, mayors from neighboring counties. Everyone wanted a quote. He ignored them all. Downstairs, a group of community members gathered outside HQ. Handmade signs. Protect us, not your own. We believe him because it happens every day. Their chants weren't for him. They were for themselves. An officer knocked once on his door. Sheriff. Keller wants to talk. Darnell didn't look up. Not interested. He's downstairs. He's not leaving. Keller stood in the hallway like a man trying to contain a storm with a plastic tarp. He started speaking the second Darnell approached. You think this fixes anything? You've just made this department ungovernable. No one trusts anyone now. Darnell's tone was surgical. They never did. They just pretended better. Keller's jaw locked. Ward's appeal will go through. Even if he's out, this department is going to burn from the inside. You've split it. It was already split, Darnell said. I just made the fracture visible. Keller stepped closer, low voice. You can't lead men who hate you. Darnell didn't blink. Then I'll lead them through something they hate worse. Accountability. A heavy silence sat between them. Keller broke first. You're going to regret this. Darnell turned away before he could finish the next line. At noon, the city announced a formal inquiry into departmental culture. Federal observers, task forces, committees with teeth. The governor's office issued a statement calling the situation a test of institutional integrity. Ward's lawyer filed appeals within the hour, but the tide had shifted. No one wanted their name tied to him. Reporters surrounded Ward's house. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. His father gave one bitter interview to a fringe outlet, calling it a witch hunt. It didn't matter. Darnell walked through the halls that night. The usual rhythm of the station, coffee machines, boots, casual chatter, had flattened. Some officers avoided him. Some nodded with quiet acknowledgement. A few stared like they were looking at an executioner. He paused outside the holding cells, empty now, remembering how cold the cuffs had felt on his wrists that night, how small the room was, how quiet. This wasn't victory. This was exposure, the kind that stripped away the lies everyone had agreed to live inside. Outside, a helicopter hovered over the protests. The chants carried even through bulletproof glass. The machine wasn't dead, but it was cornered, and it knew who had done it. The station was quiet the night the decision became official. Ward's termination was upheld. Criminal charges were moving forward. The union's emergency injunction failed in court. No speeches, no ceremony, just a closed-door memo and a ripple through every hallway. Darnell stood alone in his office, blinds half drawn. The desk was covered with reports, statements, and legal drafts that would define the department for years. The air was cold, clean, sterile. Outside, the street still carried protest chants, but they sounded more like a pulse now than a scream. A soft knock. Captain Morales entered without speaking. She placed a folder on his desk. Final copy, IA closed. DOJ investigation begins next week, he nodded once. She didn't linger. Ward's locker had already been cleared. His nameplate pulled. The space looked like every other locker now, anonymous. He wasn't a symbol anymore. He was evidence that Keller resigned that afternoon. Publicly, it was framed as strategic transition. Privately, it was a surrender. The department's internal board fractured. Old alliances shifted overnight. Officers who had stood silent now spoke carefully, calculating their distance from the fallout. No one was pretending the machine was intact anymore. Darnell walked the perimeter of the station after dark. Empty lot, floodlights humming. The exact spot where Ward had cuffed him months earlier sat in silence, indifferent and unchanged. He crouched and touched the pavement. Cold. He heard his own breathing. That night still lived under his skin. The humiliation. The certainty in Ward's eyes when he thought the system would protect him. It had for a while, but not forever. He stood and kept walking until he reached the front steps. A handful of community organizers stood behind the barricades. No chanting now, just presence. One woman raised a sign that read, "We saw. We believed." He nodded once in acknowledgement. She didn't smile. This wasn't a celebration. It was recognition. At the press conference the next morning, lights burned hot against his face. The podium carried the county seal, nothing else. Reporters leaned forward, pens already moving. "This isn't justice," he said evenly. "It's the beginning of accountability. Justice would mean this never happened to anyone, but it does. Every day. To people who don't get microphones." Silence filled the room. Not resistance. Not applause. Just the weight of what everyone already knew. There's no single villain. There's a structure. There's a language. There's a silence. That's what has to break. A single flashbulb cracked the moment. Outside the building, the sun broke through heavy gray clouds. Protesters scattered slowly, leaving signs against the fence like gravestones. That night, the city finally went quiet. Not fixed. Not healed. Just quiet. In his house, Darnell sat at the kitchen table with the badge in his hands. The metal was cold, impersonal, exact. He understood now what it really was. Not protection, not power. A mirror. It showed people what they believed in. Ward had believed in impunity. The Union had believed in walls. He had believed in the idea that light, once shone, would burn through. It had. But light didn't fix the damage. It only made it undeniable. He set the badge down and let the silence fill the room. The machine hadn't fallen cleanly. It had cracked. It would rebuild. It always did. But this time the cracks were permanent.